Lowcountry Land Trust is working hard to protect water and land here in the Lowcountry forever. I talk one-on-one with Ashley Demosthenes of the Lowcountry Land Trust for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Ashley Demosthenes, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you're the executive director of the Lowcountry Land Trust, which is a 501c3 nonprofit and the largest local land trust here in South Carolina, working in all 17 counties of South Carolina's coastal plain. Your mission is to protect land and water forever, nurture relationships between people and place, and connect conservation to community. You envision a Lowcountry where land, water, and people thrive together. So tell me, Ashley, what's new, what's now with the Lowcountry Land Trust?
Okay, well, this is our very busy time of year, December, when we have all of our projects that are coming to a close. So our team is busily running around and signing documents, and which means that we're protecting more land, which is the good news. And we're protecting land at varying scales, from large tracts of land in rural areas to smaller but incredibly impactful parcels closer to home in the Charleston area. So we are working on farmland, working on forest land, and we're working on culturally significant and historical sites as well.
What are those new cultural sites that you just mentioned?
Sure. So we recently protected a property up in the Phillips community,
Yes.
In partnership with Phillips. It's called the Rutledge Tomb Site. And we worked with a community down in the Red Top area that just got approval this week through the South Carolina Conservation Bank to assist that organization, the Red Top Community Association, with a park property. And we also just closed on a parcel of land on Johns Island that is a working farm that will remain a working farm. And that's across the street from another project that we closed recently in partnership with the Barrier Island Little League. So we are developing new and exciting partnerships and, working together, creating a wonderful matrix of protected lands for the community.
And in the total, how many projects have you all closed on or are actually working on currently?
We have, I just signed one about 5 minutes ago. So in this month alone, I believe we're somewhere between 7 and 10 closings. And this year has been all about community-centered conservation for us, which means smaller in acreage, but incredibly high in impact for the community. So some years are higher in acreage and some are lower, but the number of transactions exceeds 10 this year, and our acreage is close to 2,500 acres in the year 2024.
So actually, as we sit here right now, what is the state of community conservation?
What is the state of community conservation?
Yes, ma'am.
It's a movement, and it is a way for people to connect to land, and particularly conserved land, in a way that is accessible, that is relatable and relevant to their daily lives. So the Angel Oak is a wonderful example. Maybe that's where you were going with this question. And if it's okay, I'd love to segue to that. The Angel Oak is a wonderful example of community-centered conservation. It's on a very busy island, as you know, but it's a very peaceful space. It's a very calming piece of land in a very busy on a very busy island in a very busy city, and being adjacent to farmland, being adjacent to a church, being adjacent to a new affordable housing community that's being built right now, a healthcare facility, a middle school across the street. You can see all those intersections where the Angel Oak is a wonderful space of contemplation, of learning about the ecology, about the culture of the Sea Islands, about everything from the civil rights movement to what species of birds are on the property. It's a very comprehensive, integrated learning experience. And when we are finished working on the trail system and the features on the property and the new visitor center in partnership with the city of Charleston, it will be the most incredible, immersive, and living museum experience.
How do you conserve land when there's an inflation and a flux of people moving to Charleston on a daily basis?
Quentin, it's hard. I will just be honest with you. It is tough. Land prices are high. The rate of land loss is also very high. So we work with our conservation partners in a very tactical and strategic fashion. So we know we're not out there to save it all. We know we can't save it all, and that's okay. What we try to do is go after the most high conservation value properties, and also speaking to the community what matters to them. So it's both us being proactive and pursuing protection of natural resources that we know will serve future generations of people and wildlife, but we're also partnering with communities to save what's about to be lost in their own backyard, and that's important. So it is very tactical, and it's very strategic, and it takes, I think, persistence, perseverance. It takes funding. We are always applying for funding from the local conservation banks at the county level. I just attended a South Carolina Conservation Bank board meeting earlier this week in Florence, South Carolina, where they approved funding for projects. And without the Conservation Bank and without the Greenbelt program here in Charleston and in Berkeley and Dorchester and Beaufort and
Sure.
all the different counties across the state, we would not be able to be as nimble and as successful as we have been.
You talk about obviously those properties that may be about to be lost because of what's transpiring here in the Low Country.
Sure. Yes.
Where do you start to try to preserve some of that? Is it Phillips? Is it Red Top? Is it
It's
Johns
both.
Island?
It's both. It's all of the above. So, we're triaging.
Yeah.
Where the conservation community is in triage mode because of these different places, particularly on that urban rural interface. That space where the urban area transitions into the rural is where there's a lot of pressure, and it's not easy to do the work there. But we perform well. We come in. We negotiate. A fair price. We get appraisals. Everything is above board, and as long as we can secure the funding and figure out an exit strategy for properties that we buy, then we're able to achieve a solid conservation outcome. When we work with private landowners on conservation easements, they have to come to the table motivated, and all of them are. They see the land loss that's going on around them, and they want to protect their property with a conservation easement that we will hold. So it's again, it's a tactical approach, especially in the growing Charleston region. But we start honestly with relationships and conversations. It all starts with picking up the phone, setting up a meeting, and inviting a conversation.
What is that conversation now about Charleston growing and people trying to save the properties that have been there for decades and generations?
Exactly. It is what's at stake if we don't act now, and how can we help? So, sometimes it's us approaching the landowner, and sometimes it's them approaching us. It's mostly the landowners approaching us, saying, we see what's going on. We read about it in the papers. We're very concerned, and we want to protect our legacy, our family property, or our cultural legacy. How can we do that? And we guide them through the steps to be able to do that. And so it's a very open dialogue, and through the process, what a beautiful thing that happens is we develop these amazing relationships with people, and then one project will lead to another project. So they'll tell their neighbors, hey, guess what? We just worked with Lowcountry Land Trust on this project. Maybe you could do the same. And so word gets around, and that's how it goes.
And, when you talk about, obviously, that conversation, what else is being brought into the conversation that is really missing?
I think that people are hungry for leadership from our elected officials to be supportive of the protection of green space and to plan development in appropriate places. So those kinds of things come up in conversation. I think that protection of natural resources is no longer something that is perceived to be not unnecessary, but kind of off in the distance. It's a very much here and now issue, particularly with the flooding that we're seeing, with the storm events. Sea level rise is a huge concern on the and off the peninsula in both places, and how land conservation could be an answer to those concerns. That is I think missing from the conversation, but it's beginning to become more and more accepted that by setting aside natural resources, let those systems work for us, so that they end up actually, we protect them so that they can protect us, if you will. It's a mutually reinforcing activity and an action to take.
And what natural resources systems right now are helping us here in the Low Country?
Absolutely. Our salt marshes, our river systems, our swampland. So upriver,
Yes.
those swamplands, those bottomland hardwood forests are like sponges. They absorb floodwater, and if we convert those into developed spaces, then you lose the ability to absorb all that floodwater. So, and of course, we are very blessed with water in the Low Country, as you know. So, planning development around the water that exists here in the wetlands is a challenge, but it must be done thoughtfully so that we don't create unintended consequences. So, it's salt marshes, it's our upland forests, our longleaf pine forests, our bottomland hardwood forests, wetlands. All of those systems really matter and make a big difference. We call it green infrastructure.
Yes, that makes sense. But
Hmm.
actually, with the growth that we have here now, and for lack of a better word, the fill and build development that's going on here in the Low Country,
Oh
what are
yes.
those unintended consequences that we're dealing with right now?
Well, you see neighborhoods that will flood, during hurricane season that never flooded before, and so people are experiencing damage and flooding to their homes in places that they wouldn't have anticipated that. But if you go back into the history books and see where these developments were placed, it was they're vulnerable. Neighborhoods that are built on top of or near wetlands are vulnerable. So we see that happening. We see the temperature rising. We see places that are experiencing more heat than other places that are slightly higher elevation. So heat is another issue, and lack of shade. No vegetation or trees to provide shade for developed parts of the Charleston area. Those are all things that make a difference in one's quality of life, and one's ability to stay where they want to stay with their family.
What are those developed parts of Charleston that concern you right now?
Well, my office is downtown Charleston, and we are just a block away from where flooding regularly happens, just on a high tide. So, that is a concern. I'm also see sprawl, urban sprawl happening out in the, outside of the urban area or outside the, peninsula, and the more of those areas that get developed, the less we're able to protect those resources that can mitigate the storm events and the other environmental pressures that we're experiencing. So, up and down Highway 17, up into Allendale, down into
Sure,
Ravenel, up
sure.
I-26 around the Somerville area, and Dorchester and Berkeley counties. That the Tri-County region is under a tremendous amount of pressure. And I was driving up to Monk's Corner the other day for a Berkeley County Conservation Commission meeting where they were reviewing projects to fund. It's a wonderful new program that they have online. And I couldn't believe how much development had gone on in that part of the Low Country. It was staggering how many houses had gone up. And we understand people are moving here because of the quality of life. We understand people have to live somewhere. That's not that's not just we're not disputing that. I think it's where we develop and how we develop it needs to be very thoughtful, and so that we don't love this place to death. We all love it, but let's not love it to death.
Where should they be careful? Well, where should with the city government, or well, with government in generalities, I should say, where should they be careful when they develop in certain areas here in the Low Country?
Certainly, areas that are proximate to wetlands, places that have a tendency to flood, and so choosing higher ground is always a better option. And then also, I think having the conversation about um, re reinventing spaces that had been developed before that need redevelopment before new development. I think redevelopment projects are a great way to help prevent sprawling out into other places. I think it's probably less expensive to create a new development than to redevelop, but a redevelopment of spaces that had been already paved, already altered years ago is a great opportunity for that urban redevelopment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm just trying to think of, and there are partners that are working on this, and I do think that our elected officials are definitely thinking about that. That's happening in places like in West Ashley, where there are old developments that are, the whole area has changed dramatically, and it's an opportunity to redevelop. And I'm seeing that happening. I'm a resident of West Ashley. I'm seeing that happen, and I'm really excited about it because it's breathing fresh life into these parts of the city and new energy, as opposed to going out and making another Citadel Mall or somewhere else beyond, way out in the hinterlands where you have to drive so very far. If you can redevelop the spaces that are already there, that's a good thing.
And I know you don't want to get too in depth in this, obviously, but what redevelopment projects would you all, as far as the nonprofit organization Lowcountry Land Trust, actually endorse?
We don't typically endorse or condemn certain developments. I think that at a high level, what we are interested in is making sure that our land, the culturally sensitive spots, and the communities like Phillips, like Beefield, like Snowden, places
Sure.
like that in the East Cooper are thought of and not paved over, obviously. And so, if we're planning development, let's make sure that we're preserving the cultural sites. Let's also make sure that we are, not by default promoting growth out into the more rural areas. So again, we don't condemn development. We don't condone development either. What we are thinking about is land conservation, and how can land conservation be a benefit to the public and interface with urbanization in a way that's complementary. We are all about a healthy built environment as much as we are about a healthy natural environment, and the two can coexist. But we have to be at the table. The conservation community needs to be at the table with our planners, our community planners, and those that are making those decisions about where development can go and where development, frankly, shouldn't go.
What exactly are those culturally sensitive areas right now that are in danger of being redeveloped?
Mm-hmm. So again, I think Phillips was one of those, has been one of those, and they have a very local,
Yes.
locally active community there. Same with the Snowden community. We worked with the Beefield community on James Island.
Okay.
That was at risk of being lost. And we worked with them on being able to acquire some land there that they will be able to maintain in their community forever. So that was at risk of being lost. The Red Top site that I talked about is also at risk of being lost. So, many of these spots, particularly the vulnerable communities that are surrounded by just larger neighborhoods and growing areas, are vulnerable. So we are here to help those communities be able to preserve sites that matter to them and that have cultural and community significance. So, those are some examples, but there's so many more, Quintin. I mean, I can't even. There's a long list. Other places around smaller communities like McClellanville, there
Oh,
are beautiful and significant culturally rich sites in that area that we're working on in the McClellanville area that we don't want to lose. There are places down in the Beaufort area, in Colleton County.
well,
So, everywhere you look, I mean, South Carolina is such a desirable place. Everybody wants to move here. And when that happens, the unintended consequences is that you're at risk of losing some important sites if you're not intentional about protecting them.
protecting them. You keep hearing in the news about Arundel and McClellanville. What is the protection plan for these particular two exciting, loved areas of Charleston?
Well, there's a whole community of conservation groups that are working
Mm.
in the Onondaga and the McClellanville area, and we all work in a very complementary fashion. So there are groups that are buying land to incorporate into the national forest.
Mm.
There are groups that are working with the town of Onondaga on conservation projects there, and those two communities are so incredibly unique because they're located between a national wildlife refuge on one side and Cape Romaine, and then on the other side, the Francis Marion National Forest. So these two incredibly important, ecologically, significant systems on either side, and with a lot of land conservation opportunities in between, up and down the Highway 17 corridor. So those are important communities that we are all trying to contribute to in some way, shape, or form through land acquisition or through conservation easements. That the water quality in the Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge is of the highest quality that you can possibly reach, and that's important to preserve and maintain. But working with the community to make sure that they feel they're a part of this groundswell of interest in land conservation is very important, and there are groups that are doing just that.
How educated is the community about land conservation and
I think,
easements?
yeah, no, I think it's getting more and more into the consciousness of
Mm.
our community. But you'll see there's been some recent coverage in the Post and Courier. There's been some editorials about conservation easements and what they are, how they work, why they're important, and I hope to be having an op-ed coming out very soon about the benefits of private land conservation and how complementary they are to public land conservation. The two, work together very, very well. We just celebrated the 35th anniversary of the Ace Basin project. The big watershed and landscape between Charleston and Beaufort, and land conservation was really. There was an incredibly locally driven movement down there 35 years ago that built a connected, protected area that people love and can drive through on their way to Beaufort or Savannah and just be in awe of the amount of land that's been protected down there. So the same is being done, between Charleston and McClellanville,
Oh, yes.
and in other coastal focus areas around the Black River, around the Waccamaw, the PD.
Oh, yes.
River systems are important for the environment, but they're also important culturally, and people are just so excited about the amount of momentum happening right now with the creation of new state parks, but also the conservation easements that help connect the state parks and the other public lands together. So it's a win-win for everybody when land conservation through conservation easements and through land acquisition and state parks and national wildlife refuges can come together.
And what conservation easements are on the rise that you and your team are actually focused on right now?
We have a few. We've got one on Johns Island that we're working on that just got approved at the State Conservation Bank this week. We have another one that's up near the Santee River that we're about to close. We closed one earlier this year down in Colleton County within the Ashepoo River corridor. So there are numerous, and we have a very robust pipeline of conservation easement projects that we will be working on in 2025. Sometimes we begin to work on one or several in a year, and they decide for various reasons that the timing works better for the landowner to kick it into the next year. So we've seen that happen a little bit this year. But yeah, no, I think conservation easements as a tool are relatively well known, but it's still worth getting the word out to the community that this is an option for permanent land protection if you are a private landowner and you want to make sure that you're protecting your land for for your family's legacy or for just future generations. So,
and I know this is obviously out of your purview, but let's talk about Georgetown. It's a place that I
okay.
love a whole lot. What is the plan to protect some of those particular areas there that are so culturally sensitive to a lot of people?
Oh, sure. We and other land trust organizations are aware of the potential for protection around the Georgetown area. We've got staff who are working up in the Georgetown County region. There's a lot of forest land and farmland in the Georgetown area, and that's incredibly important for us to protect. And we are interested in accelerating our work in that part of the coastal region because of the opportunities in the Georgetown region. So yes, I think there's no shortage of opportunity there, and there's also no shortage of interest in partnering with landowners in that area, and to help protect that incredible landscape. It's there's a lot along the immediate coast that's been done, but within those river corridors, there's
Yes.
a lot of opportunity along the Santee River, along the Sandpit River, the Waccamaw. Yep.
Oh, that's really amazing. Can't wait to hear more about that. Ashley, yeah. But for now, Ashley Demosthenes, thank you.
Demosthenes. I
That's
know it's
right.
a long,
Long.
complicated Greek name.
Yeah, yeah, love the name, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, with the Lowcountry Land Trust. Thank you for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Quentin. It's always good to see you.
I appreciate it greatly. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Yeah, that was great.